Well, hello, everyone. This is Fadi, and you're in for a special treat. If you are watching us right now through our YouTube channel, Sira International, or even the PfanderFilms YouTube channel for Dr. J. Smith, or if you are on my Facebook page, alfadi.sira, you are going to be definitely enjoying the content and the guests that will be joining us shortly here. The topic, obviously, as you have noticed, is called the historical critique of Islam, and specifically introducing the SIN Sifters. This is a nickname that Dr. J came up with just maybe a day or so ago. And what we mean by SIN is the standard Islamic narrative. And the guests that we have are the one who have been unpacking many of the holes in that particular narrative. That's why we're calling them the sifters. They're going through what is real, what is not real, what is factual, what is not factual. And I really came up with this idea and shared it with Dr. J, and I'm so glad that he enjoyed and liked this idea. And then we shared it with our guests, whom we will be introducing soon here, to see if they'll be willing to take some of their busy time to join us, especially at this time of year. And we are so honored to have a large caliber, high caliber of scholarship that will be joining us soon. We have a number of people whom Dr. J. Smith probably have introduced in the past on his channel, have even introduced in different formats concerning their research when it comes to the holes in the standard Islamic narrative. I myself have the privilege, of course, of introducing Brother Mill, who will be one of those guests, but we have others such as Brother Murad. We have also Odin. We have Paul and Paul Ellis, if you wish. And also we have Thomas. But I'm just giving you a flavor of those guests that will be joining us. And each one of them have a passion about a specific topic related to the standard Islamic narrative, but also they've covered many other areas, obviously. However, we are going to let them unpack things for us from that perspective. Now, a couple of special things about this particular live stream. It will be a 2-hour live stream, so make sure if you're planning on staying the whole time to plan for 2 hours. If not, obviously, you can always watch it at a later time if you could not really continue for that long. It is going also to be part of my radio podcast, Let Us Reason. That's why every 25 minutes or so, we are going to take a quick break, and we will start again with part 2 and then part 3 and part 4. As far as our viewers are concerned, feel free to send your questions. However, be patient with us because we have a lot of stuff that will be covered here, and it's going to be a 2-hour long. So we'll do our best to capture some of your questions as time permits, and we'll do our best to address your concerns and your comments as well. But let me start first by introducing our dear brother, Dr. J. Dr. J, thank you so much, of course, for doing what you do, brother. It's really amazing the type of comments that I get all the time about the work that you've been doing. I'm blessed to have this partnership with you. It seemed like we have this rapport together, and people enjoy really this dialogue. I bring my background. I'm a former Muslim. I speak Arabic. I'm from Saudi Arabia, which is the focus of your research, has to do with Mecca, which is in Saudi, and also the Quran and the man, which is Muhammad. All are associated and affiliated according to the Islamic narrative, obviously the standard Islamic narrative, with that region. This is why I enjoy to have this back and forth with you, and also to confirm some of the facts that you are presenting, because people, I know how my Muslim people think. They may accuse you of like, you don't know what you're talking about, you've never been there. Well, you have someone who's been there, so we can complement one another. But what got you yourself into this particular field?
Well, it happened way back in the 1990s. I was in London. I was living in London. I was there for 25 years. I would go down to a place called Speaker's Corner, and I was taking a course at School of Orient and African Studies from Dr. Gerald Hotting. And the course was on the historical perspective, looking at history, the historical critique of Islam, the emergence of Islam. And it was an entire year course of just looking at how Islam actually emerged from the historical standpoint. What does history actually tell us? And I remember as I started taking this course, there were about 40 or 50 students in the class. Within 2 weeks, a good 20 of them had left, and they were all Muslims. And some of them, as they left, they were slamming the door and yelling explicatives, which I'm not permitted to repeat right now, about what he was saying, because what he was doing, he was just asking what was really happening in the 7th century from what history can tell us. So this was back in 1993, 1994. I started seeing the reaction of the Muslims, so I started taking it down to Speaker's Corner and started introducing it at Speaker's Corner. And it was the reaction of the Muslims when they heard this kind of material, because they didn't know what to do with it. They didn't know how to respond to it. Oh, I got punched. I got my glasses broken. It was obvious to me that this historical critique, at that time, I said, this has got to be the Achilles heel of Islam. If they can't respond, if this is the only response they can give by yelling and explicatives and slamming the door, leaving the class, and at the same time at Speaker's Corner, if all they can do is punch me, we have got something here. And I started to think, and I said, hold on a minute. If this was done to me with Christianity, would we not have the same problems? And I remember in my days as a seminary student where we studied the historical critique. We looked at redacted criticism. We looked at textual criticism of the Bible. We looked at source criticism of all these stories. I remember going through this during my master's thesis, and I realized, hold on a minute, we have already had this. This has been done to us, and Christianity has pretty much been able to, not only has been able to answer every one of these criticisms, but has been fomented because of these criticisms. So why can't we take the same questions, the very same questions that were asked of Jesus, whether or not he existed, whether or not he died on the cross, ask the same questions of the Bible, whether or not we can go back to the manuscripts, looking at the textual criticism that is done of the Bible, ask those questions that have already been done on our Lord and our Savior and on our scriptures, and let's take it to Islam, on their man, their book, and now more recently, their place. The book would be the Quran, the man would be Muhammad, and the place, of course, would be Mecca. So that's what I started doing. That was 1994. 1995, I did my first debate on this, and this was with Dr. Jamal Badawi at Cambridge University, Trinity College. I did a 2-hour debate, and all I did was ask 10 historical questions, all of which I got from Dr. Patricia Corona the week before. Dr. Patricia Corona, as you well know, is probably one of the leading scholars she's no longer living in this area. She was a head of department there at Cambridge University, and she was the one that put that debate together for me. 10 historical challenges, none of which have been resolved, have been answered by Muslims. And that was in 1995 that I did that debate. So here we are at the end of 2021, and we're still asking the same question. But then what happened was about a year and a half ago, you remember that interview between Dr. Yasser Qadi and Muhammad Hijab, where they asked the question about the Qira'at in the Ahruf, and he put out his hand and says, which are you going to put there? And Yasser Qadi says, we don't talk about this in public. This is something we don't talk about. If you want to take a deep dive, then you want to come with me and take a deep dive, then you can take my class, but don't talk about this, not with the camera on. And I suddenly realized, hold on a minute, this stuff, this material, this is one of the leading scholars can't even talk about this in public, why are we keeping this quiet? Why shouldn't we be mass producing it all over the internet, certainly? And as I started bringing this up on the internet, I started coming across really main players, people who really knew what they were talking about, other individuals that I started saying, hold on, this guy knows what he's referring to. And I had already heard of Mel, who you're going to introduce next. Mel is the one I first came across because he was actually part of our team. He used to come to Speaker's Corner before I left in England. He was the first one that I started engaging with this. Well, Mel introduced me to Paul, and Paul you're going to see him coming on. It was because of what I was doing on the coins that I got introduced to Odun. Odun wanted to talk with me about the coins, and I saw this guy really knew his material. And then I was introduced by Mel to a guy named Murad from the Middle East, and Murad came on board, and I said, these guys are brilliant. These guys are brilliant. But then I came across another name there, a guy named Thomas. And I said, who's this Thomas guy? Here I find out he's from Germany. But I was just looking at the comments below the videos on PfanderFilms. And the comments are brilliant. And I hope you look at your comments, because when you look at the comments, you start to see who are the people who really know what they're talking about, who are the people who have really done their homework, who are the people who are actually coming up with reference after reference. And I contacted them. And I said, can you come on board? Can you say, I don't want to be the one to hear it. I want the whole world to hear it. Why don't you come on board and let's have you unpack this material? So that's why we brought them today. I want these 5 guys for you to see, for your audience, because your audience really hasn't, except for Mel, you really don't know these guys yet. You haven't really come across them yet. And I want you to introduce to your group, because your group is even larger than what I have. I want your subscribers to start to get to a whole new panoply of major players. These are the major players. And so these guys, as you're going to find, have not just been doing this for a few weeks. They've been doing this for years. And the material that they have come up with, you and I can communicate it, and that's our job. We're sitting there to communicate it, to make sure it gets out to the world. But the men who are actually doing the research, the hard research, are the ones we're going to introduce now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for this excellent segue.
Well, before we go on, we are calling ourselves the SIN Sifters. What is a sifter? This is a sifter, folks. Let me just show it to you. Listen, I was getting back all this. What did you mean? What does sifter mean? And it's all from guys. If you are women, you know exactly what I'm talking, because every one of you women have one of these in your kitchen. This is where you sift through. What do? You put things through you, and what comes out is the good stuff. You want to get the bad stuff that stays in there, and you throw the bad stuff away. What we're doing is, and every one of these guys that we're going to introduce this afternoon, they have been putting the standard Islamic narrative into this. And what's coming out below, what's coming out of it is what is actually historical. So we're sifting the SIN, the standard Islamic narrative. We're sifting sin. So you can see it's a play on words for obvious, and people who get it. We're sifting the sin, the standard Islamic narrative, and we're trying to find out what is historical. That's why we're calling ourselves the SIN Sifters. We are the ones that really are trying to get back, not to the 8th, the 9th century, or 10th century. We want to go back to the 7th century. We want to go back to when it all began. When is the standard Islamic narrative tells us it all began. That's the name, the reason for the name.
Wonderful. Thank you, brother. Again, if you're joining us right now, we are doing a 2-hour special live stream with Dr. J and a team of amazing researchers and scholars that we will be introducing soon, who have been pouring into basically the standard Islamic narrative, sifting through, as Dr. J just mentioned, and trying to compare and contrast facts with at least what the standard Islamic narrative has presented to us, and deciding what really is considered to be historically factual versus what might be a just simple narrative that cannot be corroborated with a number of evidence that has been unpacked so far, and possibly even more in the future. Now, if you are listening to us on our podcast, this is also a special live stream of our Let Us Reason. It's going to be actually 4 parts for our radio audience. This is part 1, and we will introduce shortly the first guest, Brother Mel. But before I do so, I just want to remind our also amazing control room. At some point, I would like to start seeing the comments in front of me, so to see if anyone is asking any specific questions, because we are dealing with live audience as well. So we'll start with Brother Mel. Brother Mel, thank you so much, of course, for taking time to be here with us. You and I actually have interacted numerous times, and just up until recently, we actually did, if I recall, 9 or 10 video series. We even called it Holes in the Narrative, and you brilliantly came up with a number of evidences that can show why at every single level, in every episode, there is a hole that cannot be really basically vouch for if we rely only on the historical data provided to us by the narrative itself. Rather, your findings pointed out to an obvious contradiction. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself one more time, Mel, to our audience, to the level you feel comfortable with, and tell us about your passion. I mean, you deal a lot with maps, iconography, tomes, things like that. So go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I'm Mel, and I'm from Ireland. I got involved with Jay back in 2015 at Speaker's Corner. I was one of the quiet ones in his group, observing, taking notes, and I was really fascinated with a video that he did on the internet to do with the historical critique of Islam. And around that time, Dan Gibson's theory was really big, and it just grabbed me. It was like a big puzzle I wanted to solve. And like a lot of people, I looked at the Hadiths, and I spent about 3 months reading through al-Bukhari's Hadiths and realized pretty quickly that this is just fantasy stuff. So I went from there to look at, well, is there anything historical in that story? And so I decided to look at the earliest sources I could find about Muhammad. So I was kind of focused mostly about Muhammad for the first couple of years. And the big one that really stood out was the two earliest sources placed someone called Muhammad, in inverted commas, or anonymous prophet, in Palestine in 634. And I went, hey, that doesn't quite fit the standard Islamic narrative. So we have him in the wrong place and at the wrong time. He's meant to be dead 2 years, and yet the two earliest sources we have him still alive. And it seems to coincide, incidentally, with the time that Umar was meant to be the leader at that time. So that was a big, interesting sort of area. And since then, I've been a bit of a jack of all trades. I've been looking at different things. I've been looking at maps. I've been looking at archaeology, books, you name it. And I don't tend to stay at one particular area too long. Something grabs me. I have a few curious questions, and it leads me off down a merry-go ride, and things tend to come out of the surface. But I think one of the things that's really grabbed me of late are maps. And if you ask a few basic questions and you look at the maps, the standard Islamic narrative is completely thrown out by that. And you see that everything is up north, and this is a common theme. Every time you delve into this, you keep seeing that it must have happened up in the north and not down south. For example, if you ask, where were the Christian communities that Muhammad was supposed to have interacted with up in the Fertile Crescent? Where were the Jewish communities up in the Fertile Crescent? Where are the stations of Abraham that the Quran refers to? It's again up in the Fertile Crescent. Where were the populations? You know, every question you ask, where was the conflicts between the Byzantines and the Persians? Way up north. And then when you compare that with the Hijaz, what you find an area that has no people, by and large. It has no water, has no vegetation, it has no history, has no culture. And then you try and match that up with the Hadiths, and you have to conclude that something was made up along the way. And the more I went into it over the last few years, the more I discovered that there was less and less true about it. So that's where I'm at. That's sort of a quick summary of where I've come.
Yep. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That's, of course, fascinating. And of course, we're going to visit with you. Obviously, we still have at least an hour and a half left, a little over. And I'm trying to see some of the comments, by the way, folks. So forgive me. It's still hard for me to see all of it. But we will get back to the comments probably starting in the next part. Now I'm going to move on to Brother Murad. Brother Murad, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit also more about yourself, to the extent that you feel comfortable, of course, to do so. And I know you've done some amazing work concerning the name Muhammad, especially in the Quran. So if you can shed some light on that.
Well, thank you for having me. I am Murad. I am an amateur Arab researcher who has been looking into the history of Islam for more than 10 years. So basically, I am a little bit like Fadi, but the only difference is his English is much better than mine. I am a Muslim, then I became an atheist, but now I consider myself a theist. So I believe in God, but in a very primitive manner. Robert Spencer's debate with David Wood, did Muhammad exist, is what actually inspired me to look into the historical critique of Islam. Most people know me from Mel's channel, Sneakers Corner. So if you think like Batman and Robin, Mel would be Batman, I would be Robin. I have been his sidekick for like 2 years. But the most exposure was the video that we did, me and Mel, with Dr. J. Smith on the Dome of the Rock. It surpassed 100,000 views. And my new YouTube channel will focus in 2022, this year, about the Aramaic roots of the Quran, the meaning of the Quran, the real meaning of it, and I will depend on the work of Christoph Luxemburg and also Gabriel Sauma, not just Luxemburg. And about the name Muhammad, yes, I looked at the 4 references to Muhammad in the Quran, and I see that they're actually a reference to Jesus. So if you read this name as a descriptive title, then it will work perfectly, you see.
Wonderful. And, folks, we're going to have about 4 minutes, 5 minutes left, give or take. So I'm just going to ask a quick question. We get to Odin also. Jay, you did a show with Murad about the name Muhammad, correct?
Yeah. Actually, we did 2. We did one on the Dome of the Rock, and we also did one in the Quran itself, the 4 references to Muhammad in the Quran. And Murad has been great because he showed that very clear. In fact, let Murad just answer that. What did you find out about the name Muhammad in both of the Dome of the Rock and also in the Quran?
Well, you see the name Muhammad, if you look at it, how it was written in Aramaic, the name Yeshua. The name Yeshua is written, it looks almost identical to the name Muhammad. So it's very possible that when they Arabized the Quran at a later stage, that they read this name in this way. So Al-Muhammad means Al-Mumajjad, and this is what we say in Arabic. So, and everything in the Dome of the Rock, it's actually an attack on Christianity. And if I was going to construct the Dome of the Rock, the first thing I would like to put inside is the verses relating to the night journey, not attacking Christianity. So we will find that this also hits the night journey, and it was an attack, I think, on Byzantine Christianity. Basically, Abdul Malik was like flexing his power, and also Abdul Malik, he tried to make counterfeit coins against the Byzantine emperor. So there was this fight. This is not something that we are coming up with, you see.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Odin, we're probably going to have to pause here and get back to you in the second part. We have about maybe 3 minutes left. So I want to give you enough time to really address your background and your focus. So if you don't mind holding off for a few more minutes. But I want to revisit one more time our audience here and thank you for joining us in this, in my view, historic, actually, live stream. Not only it's 2 hour long, but we have amazing researchers here with us. You've been hearing a lot about this standard Islamic narrative from Dr. J, and even here on my channel whenever I have him here, and we've been doing series. But now you're seeing the faces, or at least you're hearing the voices of the people behind this amazing research. And we wanted them really to have this platform to introduce them to you as well. I know many on Dr. J's own platform are familiar with these fascinating researchers, amazing researchers. And I would like for my own viewers also to have this opportunity to know about them and hopefully even interact with them. We're going to ask each one of them to tell us, obviously, if they have their own platforms, their own YouTube channels at some point today, so that you can connect with them, learn from the work that they're doing, interact with them as well directly. Of course, this is also part of our podcast, Let Us Reason. That's why this is going to be part 1. For you as our radio listeners, this is going to be 4 parts, meaning 4 weeks in a row or 4 weekends in a row that you will be listening to this. But if you want to really get, ahead of the game, quicker into this, you can go to either my YouTube channel, Sira International, or to Dr. J. Smith, PfanderFilms YouTube channel, and go to this specific live stream that is airing right now on December 20th, 2021, and you will be able to watch the entirety of this live stream. Dr. J, anything else?
Just one thing, what Murad said, just why did he talk about the night journey? Because if you ask any Muslim why the Dome of the Rock is important, every Muslim will tell you that is where Muhammad went in the middle of the night there at around 6:21 on the back of the winged horse called the Burak up to Jerusalem, and there he went up to the 7 heavens. That's why the building was there to commemorate it. There's no reference anywhere to that night journey anywhere on any of the inscriptions of the original inscriptions. The later inscriptions from 1878, that's the 19th century, they had to be added on the outside of the building to alleviate that problem. But the original inscriptions, they're all about attacking Jesus Christ, attacking his divinity, attacking the Trinity, attacking his sonship. And then you have this amazing phrase, for there is only one God but God, and the Muhammadur Rasulullah, that means Muhammad, the praised one, is nothing more than a servant of God. Who do you think that's referring to? Of course, that would be referring to Jesus.
Right. Right. Thank you for adding that. And I think we are reaching the conclusion of our first part for our podcast series, Let Us Reason. Stay tuned for just a few seconds as we will make this transition over to part two, at least you as our live audience here. And thank you again for, to you, Dr. J, and thank you to everyone who is with us here in studio or at least virtually. This is Fadi, and I want to welcome you back, of course, next time to a continuation of this series. Blessings to you. Okay, well, this is now, we're kicking off our part two of the first hour of this live stream. Still, it's part of our podcast, Let Us Reason, but also it's part of our live stream that we are doing right now. And we have intentionally called this particular live stream, as you've heard us mention that a couple of times already, Historical Critique of Islam, Introducing the SIN Sifters. And what do we mean by SIN? Stands for the Standard Islamic Narrative. What do we mean by sifters? Dr. J, why don't you show people what we mean by that?
There's a sifter right there. This is, I know what this is because my wife has asked me to use it quite often to take material that has lots of imperfections in it, and you want to sift that which is pure. That which is imperfect stays behind, that which is pure falls, and that is what you hold, you put it in a bowl, and you take that and you use it. Now, what's left behind, you throw it away. Right. So what we are doing, we are the researchers who are sifting sin. We put sin into this. That's SIN, Standard Islamic Narrative. Joe actually may have come up with this. I think Joe is the one that actually came up with this, the name, the acronym SIN. So we need to give credit where credit is due. But it was the idea of taking the Standard Islamic Narrative on a play-off from what Yasser Qadhi did way back in June 8, 2020, where he actually says the Islamic narrative or the standard narrative has holes in it. Listen, there's all kinds of holes. Look at all the thousands of holes that we have here. We're finding all kinds of holes. And that's why what's fascinating to us is the SIN Sifters. We're the ones who are sifting away the chaff. We're getting away the chaff and coming back to what is left behind. What is left behind is actually the historical material. We've said this over and over again, haven't we? In all of our broadcasts, I say it on PfanderFilms with all of my friends here. We're always going back to the 7th century. We want to know what really happened historically. We want to know what really happened on the ground. We want to know where it was going on, who it was with, and what is it that they were doing. And we're not interested in the 8th and 9th century. We're sifting all that out and taking in what's left behind is the actual historical truth. So we are the SIN Sifters. We are the SIN Sifters.
Thank you. Thank you. And before last part, we had the privilege of introducing three of our guests, Dr. J, Brother Mel, and Brother Murad. We are going to introduce also three more, Odin, Paul, and Thomas. But obviously, before I do that, I want to remind people that this is a 2-hour long live stream. So we're not going to cover a whole lot yet in part two, but part three and part four, when we're going to unpack even at a deeper level, more of the work that is being done, or maybe even some of the work that will be done in 2022. And just a side comment, just to my amazing team at the control room, I am still unable to see my side. If we can raise somehow the TV or see the timer as well, because I am not able really to see all of that as of yet. So it's just a matter of logistic location of these things, but thank you so much for doing that. So, Odin, welcome, and this is really a privilege and an honor for me to meet you. I've heard a lot about you, and I am excited that also our viewers now to get to see who you are. So why don't you do the same thing? Just give us a little bit about your background, and at the same time, just tell us about the passion that you have when it comes to this standard Islamic narrative.
Well, hello Al-Fadi, hello everyone, hello Jay. Thank you for having me. So, as for me, I'm talking from France. I live in Paris. And I came across Islam something like 15 years ago through a Muslim colleague who talked to me about his faith. And he talked to me also about what we call the standard Islamic narrative. And at the time, I was working as a strategy consultant in a small firm in France, a bit like McKinsey, if you know. And I was very curious, and I had a very scientific mind, and I wanted to understand, because what my friend, what my colleague told me did not fit what I knew about the Bible, did not fit what I read in the Quran that I bought at the time. And so I think there was something odd in this standard Islamic narrative, that it did not fit the description of my friend of a religion completing Christianity, completing Judaism, because what we read in the Quran does not fit this at all. In the Quran, we find something else. It's not a completion. It's not something that comes after Christianity to better it, but it's a sort of setback. You go back to a sort of Judaism. This is what I first understood when I read the Quran. And then I thought to myself, there must be something. I have to look into the origins of Islam, and I have to look it in a scientific way. And I took interest in all the researches, and I discovered that the scholars made huge breakthrough in the field of the origins of Islam. Jay was speaking of Gerald Houghting, of Patricia Crone, but in France there are many other scholars, and I've met one, Dr. Edouard Marie Galès, who actually is from Belgium. He's not French, he's Belgian. And he published a thesis in 2005, a huge thesis, 1,200 pages, about the origins of Islam, which is named Le Messie et son prophète, the Messiah and his prophet. And for the first time, I had a sort of some synthesis of all the discoveries the scholar had made before 2005. I met him, I befriended him, I worked with him, he taught me everything he knew, and I wrote with him a little book about his thesis, which is called The Great Secret of Islam, Le Grand Secret de l'Islam, which is a small book for the general public, because the general public cannot access a thesis which is 1,200 pages. And this book had a lot of success here in France. Thousands of copies were sold, and 100,000 electronic copies were downloaded. And this put me in a situation where I had to continue to keep on studying and to keep on with science, because I wrote the book in 2014, and thereafter the discoveries kept on happening. And for example, I befriended the director of the Inara Institute. I attended many conferences there. I kept on reading, meeting scholars, and I did a sort of big update of my book, my French book, Le Grand Secret de l'Islam, The Great Secret of Islam, which will be soon available in English. And what I intend to do is to present to the general public a sort of synthesis, the big picture, in fact, the big picture of what happened in the 7th, the 8th, the 9th centuries when Islam emerged. And we can do this now. We can draw this big picture because we have new material, new studies. And especially we have, for example, coins that show us that the first Arab leaders were not Muslims, but kind of Christians or kind of Zoroastrians in the East, that they did not bear the Caliph title, for example, until Abdul Malik. He was the first one to bear the Caliph title. So what about the 4 Rashidun Caliphs? But mainly and mostly, the main discoveries have been made thanks to Quranic studies and especially to the Quranic studies that Edouard Marie-Gallès featured in his thesis. He worked with Eastern Christian scholars who know Aramaic and Arabic. And thanks to this, a new reading of the Quran has been made possible. You see, most people, and especially Muslims, read the Quran according to the standard Islamic narrative. When they read Rasul, they think, oh, it must be Muhammad. When they read Bayt, they think it must be the Kaaba. When they read Nazarene, they think it must be the Christians. But is it really? And what Edouard Marie-Gallès and his scholars did is applying to the Quran the exegesis method he learned as a priest. Because as a priest, he became very knowledgeable in exegesis, which is very simple. It's basic common sense. It is about reading a text for what it is, what it says literally. And when you do this with the Quran, you start to unveil another story. In the Quran, you find that there is a Jewish community, a Nazarene Jewish community, that was very, very influenced with its Arab audience. You find that there was an alliance between this Jewish Nazarene community and the Arab audience, an alliance which had the purpose to conquer Jerusalem, rebuild its temple, to trigger the apocalypse, to have Jesus come back as its second coming, as the Messiah, and to establish God's kingdom on earth. That did not happen. So the Arab leaders took it upon themselves to do Jesus' job, because he did not come back. And so they fought among themselves over the issue of the divine legitimacy of their power. And then emerged the strongest, who was Abdul Malik, who beat all of his rivals and who established the first caliphate. What is the caliphate? The caliphate is ruled by a caliph, and Abdul Malik bore the title Khalifat Allah, God's caliph, which means God's lieutenant on earth, God's vicar. So the caliphate is kind of God's kingdom. It is the territory where God's justice is enforced. And from there, Islam started to deploy, to emerge. But it is not until the Abbasid revolution, when the Abbasid coalition took power and overthrew the Umayyads, that we really saw Islam happening as a new religion. Because it is the Abbasids who invented the very idea of a divine revelation in order to justify their divine power. They could not justify their power as Abdul Malik did, because they just beat his successor. And so they invented this idea of a divine revelation. So they needed a prophet. Then they invented the prophecy of Muhammad. And they needed this revelation to be something. So they invented the Quran as the sacred word of God. And they invented the story of the revelation, the Asbab al-Nuzul. They invented Mecca and so on. And so we now have a sort of very big picture, a grand scheme of things, to explain how Islam emerged and to explain what is the Quran, what is Mecca, what is the prophet? Did Muhammad exist? Was he a real prophet, an actual prophet? And so on. But I want to insist on the very novelty of the Quranic studies that Edouard Marie-Gallès introduced thanks to his Eastern Christian friends,
as you can see,
it is really amazing. You find that the Quran itself can be used as an historical material and can give us proof, evidence, hard evidence of events of the real story, of the actual story, which is what I called the great secret of Islam.
Right. And Odin, I think we want you to hold off to sharing more in a little bit, because this is fascinating, of course, background that you've given people about your focus on the big picture here, which is very important because really it goes into the heart of the origin of Islam, or at least the official origin of the religion as we know it today, and the mention of the Caliph Abdul Malik, obviously. So we'll circle back to you shortly here. Hopefully, if not this part, it will be the next part. Now I want to move on to Paul. And Jay, why don't you go ahead and introduce Paul to us real quickly and let him also take it from there.
Oh, I like Paul to introduce himself. I really got to know Paul just a few months ago. And what I've enjoyed about Paul, he is coming from a whole different standpoint, looking at what we call the Jerusalem thesis. This is I think he actually coined it as well. Now, I understand that Paul is not feeling so well today. So over to you, Paul. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Feel free if you do have to cough or you have to take a drink of water. We understand. Thank you for even coming on board for us, because it's great to have you. It's good to hear your side of things.
No, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you, Fadi, for having me. Yes, my background is that I was born in Yorkshire, in Bradford, which is on its way to becoming a great Islamic city of the West. I've been living in London since 1984, and so I really regard myself as a Londoner now primarily. I was a lawyer for 20 years, working in a criminal court in London, and then I left that and I became a teacher for a while. In 2018, there was a conference in England, in London, and there were some really great names in Islamic research there. I'm ashamed to say I didn't really appreciate quite how illustrious these people were at the time, but I just bought a ticket because I was interested and I had a bit of time on my hands. And there were it was Nikolai Sinai was there, and Gabriel Said Reynolds and Sean Anthony, and I sat a couple of seats down from Stephen Shoemaker, and I didn't really know who any of these people were, but I absolutely fell in love with the topic of the Quran and the great mystery of what it means. And it was quite clear from the first couple of hours that Islam is completely different. The Quran is completely different to what Muslims think it is. It's absolutely beyond doubt, but there's no consensus within the academic community as to what the Quran actually it is or what it means. So you've got this hugely important book, a book that something like a fifth to a quarter of the world's population assert is the words of God, a book that governs such a huge swathe of the Earth's territory, from the North Atlantic right the way down to the South Pacific. And yet what people believe about it simply isn't true, just on a simple factual level. So I was enthralled by this, and I so happened, I'm not a wealthy man, but I had a little bit of money that came my way, and I decided to give myself a sabbatical year and just spend the year reading and books and articles by these people and trying to figure out myself what I thought about it all, see if there was anything that I could contribute to this debate, which seemed to me vitally important and wide open. Yeah. As Jay says, I've become most associated with what I call the Jerusalem thesis, which I first shared on Mel's channel about 18 months ago. And this is, in a nutshell, that when the Quran refers to a place as the Masjid al-Haram, the sacred place of prostration, and refers to it by various other names, the Station of Abraham, or the Kaaba, or God's house, the Holy House. These are all references to the Jerusalem temple. And the more one looks at it, one simply cannot move for evidence that this is the case. Is there so much evidence that one can't really summarize it? There's just so much of it. For example, one has the correspondences within the Quran to say everything the Quran says about the Masjid al-Haram seems to be something that relates to the Jerusalem temple. They say that it was built by Abraham, as the Quran says it was built by Abraham, and in the Bible, the temple is built upon the site where Abraham built an altar to sacrifice Isaac. It says it's the first house at Bakar. Well, Bakar is a pilgrimage destination on the way to, or stopping point on the way to the pilgrimage to the Jerusalem temple. It's frequently referred to as God's house, but then the Quran devotes so much of its text to dealing with biblical characters and biblical stories. Well, where would these biblical characters, where would they regard as God's house? There's nothing in the Quran that ever indicates that that God had two houses, or that God moves his house, or that indeed that there's any kind of geographical divide between the stories that it tells that are based in the Bible and the stories that it tells that are based about the Quran's own community. There's no sense. Nobody ever goes on this 900-mile or whatever journey from the Hijaz to Canaan or back again. The Quran refers to the Masjid al-Haram as the cube, and the Holy of Holies of the Jerusalem temple was a cube. And perhaps, I think, most compelling of all is the role of Jerusalem within the eschatological landscape. It is believed, or it was believed by Christians, that the major events of the apocalypse will take place in and around Jerusalem. The Messiah will descend on Mount Olives. He will then create this plain in Zechariah chapter 14. He will then come into the Jerusalem temple, and from there he will gather the nations of the world for judgment outside the gates of Jerusalem. And he will then cast the wicked into the fires of Gehenna. And this is exactly what we find in the Quran. The Quran talks about God creating this great plain of judgment. The Quran talks about seeing God's shin. The Quran talks about the wicked being thrown into the fires of what it calls Jahannam. And the Quran talks about going between Safa and Marwa. And Marwa is just an Arabized variant on Mount Moriah, which is where the temple was built. And Safa is an old name for Mount Scopus, which is just across the Kidron Valley. So all of these correspondences point towards the Jerusalem temple being the place that the Quran is constantly talking about, verse after verse, surah after surah.
Right. So, Paul, why don't you hold off to also your thoughts on this, because we're approaching the end of part 2, and I really would like for you to come back again and unpack this part for us, even at a deeper level, if you don't mind. And Thomas, if you don't mind waiting until part 3, because I want you to actually introduce yourself, and then we'll start with you by unpacking your thesis or findings concerning your passion when it comes to the Aramaic sources of the Quran. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for all of you who have shared so far. And next part, we will have Thomas as well, who is the last guest here in this amazing panel that we have. And many people are complimenting that, and we're so thankful for that, of course. And if you have been joining us, we were actually doing this live stream on what we call the historical critique of Islam, introducing the SIN Sifters, and the SIN stands for the Standard Islamic Narrative. Again, thank you so much, of course, Dr. J, for introducing all of this amazing panelists to us. and hopefully everyone is enjoying this. We still have one more hour to go, so don't go anywhere. We are going to wrap this part of the podcast, and we'll come back again in a few seconds to start part 3 of the podcast. But at the same time, we're continuing, of course, with this live stream. And I want to just say something to my moderators. Anyone who is distracting, block him. And I wish I can say the same thing about Jason Bourne, who is not Jason nor Bourne, by the way. I mean, he can dare to be Jason Bourne, the real one. But he's babbling the whole time. I wish the moderators over there will take care of this babbler. That's why he's not on my channel.
That's on PfanderFilms.
Yeah, that's why he's not on my channel, because we don't put up with this kind of stuff. But that's okay. You're fortunate, actually, that you are not on my channel right now. With that in mind, I want to thank everyone for joining us. Stay tuned for the next part in a few seconds.
Yeah, those real guys coming on mine. Jason Bourne's all the time.
Yeah,
he's a real troll. But he makes some stupid comments, and he just puts his foot in his mouth all the time. And you can see that people are taking good care of him.
Yeah,
they're shutting him down. That's part of the freedom of speech that we do have here.
Yeah. All right, everyone. This is Fadi, and we're back again to continue with this amazing live stream where we have fabulous and amazing researchers and panelists who have joined us to discuss this standard Islamic narrative and the holes in that narrative. Each one of them comes at the narrative from a specific passion, specific angle, specific research area, and backed up with findings, obviously. They're not talking about it from an emotional standpoint. They're talking about it from factual standpoint. And that's what we're about here, whether in my channel, Sira International, whether on PfanderFilms. We are presenting facts, and we're going to ask each one of them shortly to introduce also their own platforms where you can connect with them. You can benefit from some of the research and publications, whether in digital publications or maybe in a written form. But all that to say is that we are doing this for the benefit of everyone, including our Muslim friends that I am hoping that are watching us right now. And just go and examine the evidence. That's all I ask for. Just go and examine the evidence, and that's all we ask about. Well, we're left with one last panelist, and we are going to start this particular live stream and this particular part of the podcast with him, Thomas. Thomas, thank you so much, of course, for taking the time to be with us. And I would like for you really to tell people a little bit about yourself, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, obviously. And tell us also if you have your own platform, your own YouTube channel, and dive into the topic, the area of expertise that you focus on when it comes to the standard Islamic narrative. My understanding it has to do with Aramaic, of course.
Well, thank you very much for having me. My name is Thomas Alexander. I'm from Germany, and my background is actually in computer science, which means that both by nature and by training, I would say I'm quite good at recognizing patterns and understanding systems, which turns out to be quite helpful when studying the history of Islam. So how did I even get into this? So I've always been a big, history nerd, if you will. So I've always been interested in history, and particularly the history of religions. And initially, actually, Islam wasn't high on my list. But that kind of changed when Christoph Luxemburg published his book on the Syro-Aramaic origins of the Quran in the year 2000. Although at that point, I wasn't all in, so I was aware of his work. I knew what he was talking about, that the Quran has has Aramaic origins, that it started out as a lectionary read in Christian churches, but in non-Trinitarian Christian churches. But at that point, I still didn't dig that much deeper. But that then changed roughly 15 years ago, I would say, when I randomly came across a radio program where Karl-Heinz Ohlig, who at that point in time was the head of the Inara Institute, was a guest, and he talked about their research and their findings, and I was absolutely fascinated because it actually went a lot deeper than what I thought from just hearing about Christoph Luxemburg. And I actually started to dig in, to read their papers that they publish and to see what this is all about. Maybe one quick word on this Inara Institute. So these are a group of scholars, which is they're located in Saarbrücken in Germany, but it's not just German, so it's really an international effort, and they are sort of building on the old historical critical thinkers, like starting from the 19th century with Nöldeke and then Ignaz Goltz here. They've already sort of laid the foundation. Alphonse Mingana as well. He, I think, was the first to actually propose this, that there's a lot of Aramaic in the Quran in the 1920s. But then this field sort of died down a bit, and it was these Inara guys in the 1990s who picked this up again and brought it really to a bigger stage once again. And that's pretty much what I've been doing over the last 15 years. I've just studied mainly for my own benefit, so I didn't share much of it until Jay brought me onto his channel and asked me to share my findings. Which I happily did, and now I'm currently, since now I've already collected everything for this YouTube format, I've now started to actually put it together in book form, which I hope to finish at some point next year. It is a massive undertaking, but I hope it will all turn out well. I'm also trying to start my own YouTube channel. It's also on my list for the next year. Before I can bring it online, I want to pre-produce some things. So again, it's in the future. And yeah, I guess my main point of entry was this Aramaic origin of the Quran, because what we find out when we actually look at the Quran itself is that large parts of it just don't make a lot of sense, right? So they can't really be understood. When you read the tafsir, it'll say something along the lines of, the scholars can't agree, or God knows best. So basically, even the scholars don't know what's going on there. And with people like Christoph Luxemburg, we actually now have the tools to unlock these passages that previously were incomprehensible, right? And that's really what fascinates me so much, because it really opens a whole new door for understanding the Quran. And I would say that's what drives me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to ask each one of you, I'm going to go back again to the beginning of the panel. I'm going to ask each one of you to tell us, of course, what are you doing or what are you planning on doing on 2022? I mean, Thomas already covered that for us. And then I want you to start thinking about another question I'm going to ask. What is the most damaging thing that you've discovered when it comes to the standard Islamic narrative? So let's start with Mel again. Mel, what are you working on for 2022?
Good question. I'm looking at the Greek influences on the Quran. And the reason being is I had a guest on my channel a few weeks ago who was an Alawite, and he actually said something really interesting. He says that the Alawites view the Greek philosophers as prophets. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. I wonder, is there any connection there with the Quran? And what I've discovered looking into the Quran is there are definite influences there, definite points where they seem to be interested in Greek philosophers, not in a systematic way, but just a kind of a casual awareness. And what I was interested in is the fact that both then and now, the community living in Syria had a lot of connections with Greece. There were expats from the Greek community living in Syria, quite a large population. And these were people who could speak Greek and they could speak Syriac. And so that would speak to the idea that the Quran was written up there in the north. And I think this is going to be another avenue of interest. So that's what I'm planning to explore. There's probably going to be lots of other things as well. I'm interested in the Zamzam well as well at the moment. Yeah. And the mechanics of getting water to the people of Mecca. So that's also going to be a big area of interest.
Wonderful. I'm glad you brought this up because me and Jay are going through recording a video series right now, and one of the topics I will be addressing is the well of Zamzam. And again, I want to let all of my panelists know that I would love to invite each one of you individually into my live stream, my own channel, hopefully starting in January, according to your own schedules. And then at some point, we'll start bringing you also to the studio this way via Zoom, because I want people to really benefit from all of your findings and the research. And it's not really fair for all of you to be together because each one of you have tons of info that our viewers can benefit from. But today, think of it as just a way to introduce your work, introduce the faces behind those names that have been mentioned numerous times. And I'm thankful for all of you, of course. Murad, I'm going to ask you the same question, my friend, which is, what are you doing in 2022? But I want to address this. A question popped up a couple of times here. When we say Muhammad is the praised one, the question is in Arabic, it should have been Al-Muhammad. So I want you to take the time to answer this because I didn't want to respond to that question. It was directed basically to something you brought up. So go ahead.
Yes, you see, when someone says this, he is still thinking 100% Arabic. But it's written Muhammadun Rasulullah. So if you want to translate it like literally in English, it will be praised be the one, not the praised one. So praised be the prophet of God. Muhammadun is in Arabic we say sifa. It's a descriptive term.
That's right.
So no, you don't need the alif and lam here. You don't need the here. No problem here.
And I would agree with you because even though one of the names of Allah is Ar-Rahman, no Muslim in the right mind, when you say Rahman, they would gravitate towards someone else. They're always going to think Allah, basically. And that's why even if you use in this case, sifa, as you stated, you are using a description of someone that you don't have to use the definite article sometimes just to do that.
Yes, and also if you look at the name Muhammad, the way it's written, it's very like, if it's for a normal person, it will be very narcissistic. But Jesus Christ, at least he thought to be God, so it fits someone who thinks he is God, not someone who is normal. If you want it to be like a term that's normal, it will be Muhammad. Right. So the one who actually does the praising.
So, my friend, tell us, what are you working on for 2022? Is it the same thing? Is there something you are already researching? Are there things you want to surprise us and keep people anticipating?
Yes, I will look at the Aramaic meaning of the Quran, and I will start with the very small surahs in the back of the Quran, what they really mean. And as a surprise for future audience, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدْ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدْ, it's not really Unitarian like people think. It still has a Trinitarian element in it. And this is all cracked through Aramaic. And I want to look also at the names of the surahs, what they actually mean in Aramaic. So I will totally focus on the Aramaic layer. I will not really focus on geography or coins this year, because without the Aramaic meaning of the Quran, like we are lost, you see.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Looks like, Jay, Aramaic is the new way to go these days.
Actually, and you're not going to ask me this, so I'm going to tell you right now. In January, we'll be introducing a whole new paradigm. We're doing research, and I have my team in Britain who are researching this, and they're coming up with even more stuff. Right now, I've just been handed an 85-page research paper that's going to take this even one step further. Not just the Aramaic, it's the whole Syriac contingent that we're going to start introducing in January. We're not just going to look at the language. We're going to start looking at all the practices. We're looking at the beliefs. We're going to be looking at the doctrines. Wait till you see what we have found. And this is all coming out in January. So I want to whet people's appetite, but I don't want to really give it away. It's all going to be complementing what these guys are doing, but even more so, because it's just getting better and better. The more scratch, the more that we scratch, the more that we find. The more that we find, the more that we shine. The more that we shine, the more they whine. Oh, how sublime. And this is what all is going to be introduced coming January.
Yeah, I see some whiners in your channel, by the way. We know how to handle the whiners. We give them cheese. but that's the way we do it. So, Odin, back to you. You are covering the big picture, and you're talking about the Caliph Abdul Malik. And I didn't mean, of course, to cut you off. I wanted just to make sure that everybody else get the chance also to jump in. But back to you now. What is it about Abdul Malik that you felt like was so damaging to the standard Islamic narrative? And what are you doing in 2022 in relationship to the big picture?
The thing with Abdul Malik is that when you really look into him, into his beliefs, he does not appear as a Muslim. He appears as a sort of demigod, a sort of equivalent to Jesus, to the Messiah who should have come to establish God's kingdom. And everything with Abdul Malik is about this. It's about power. He claims to be the equivalent of the Messiah, and he also claims to be the equivalent of the Byzantium emperor. His title, his caliph title, is like the Basileus, kind of Basileus title that the Byzantium emperor bore. In Byzantium, the emperor had power over the religion and politics. And this is exactly what Abdul Malik did. So there is a sort of, he's a sort of mirror image of what's happening in Byzantium. Besides, when we look into it, Abdul Malik bore the title Khalifat Allah and not Khalifat Rasulullah. This is something to be considered. Why is it that we do not find this title Khalifat Rasulullah before the Abbasids? So there are lots of stuff going on with Abdul Malik, and I will keep on working on this topic in the next year. And besides, I will keep on addressing the English-speaking audience. I intend to publish my book in English. I intend also to write an article on the Quran with Dr. Edouard Marie-Gallet, a scientific article which will explain what I call the Nazarene reading of the Quran. Nazarene as Jewish Nazarene, as the Nasara that we found, the Nasara phrase, the Nasara expression that we found in the Quran. It will be a very scientific article telling us about the different people that we find in the Quran, the Kuffar, who are the Kuffars, who are the Nazarenes, who are the people of the books, or people of the book, people of the scripture. And when we really dig into the Quran, we find that those people are not what the standard Islamic narrative tells about. For example, about a little thing about the people of the book. When you just read the Quran for what it is, you see that they are not all the same. It's in Surah 3, verse 113, for example. They are not all the same. There is among the people of the book a standing community. And you see that the Quran here, and also in many other passages, gives us evidence that there was a specific community among the people of the book, the people of the scripture, the people of the sacred scriptures of this time, meaning the Jews. There was a good community among them. And so what did they do? I told you about an alliance with the Arab audience. So there will be a big article about this, making all things clear. And I have many other projects. I'm involved in an organization here in France called Mission Ismeri, which is dedicated to helping ex-Muslims, Muslims who converted to Christianity, and dedicated to spreading the gospel to them and also to teaching people about Islam. And I intend to develop a media project with a big studio, a bit like yours, Fadi. But we will address the French and maybe Arab audience. So many good things to come next year.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'll get back to you, of course, in a second here about the other question. But Paul, Can you also, I mean, you were talking about the Jerusalem theory again. What is so damaging in the Jerusalem theory to the standard Islamic narrative, and what are you working on for 2022 in the next few minutes, by the way, that we have here?
Hi. What I find is the most. I don't like to think of it as damaging, because I don't really want to damage anyone or anything. But what I find is revelatory about the Jerusalem thesis is that the Quran actually makes sense. So much of the Quran, so many Muslims for the last 14 centuries must have sat there scratching their heads, saying, why on earth does the Quran say this? Why does it say that? Why is it telling us this story of Dhul-Qarnayn? Why is it telling us the story of Moses and the fish? Why is it telling us this or that? Why was Muhammad going out and trying to conquer this place of Mecca? Why was he robbing the caravan trains? Why was he exiling and killing the Jewish tribe? So many questions in the traditional narrative. Where does the elephant come into it? Where does the elephant come from in Surah 105? And why does the Quran bother telling us about this episode, since it seems to have nothing to do with anything else? And what I find is the most revelatory part of the Jerusalem thesis is that the Quran actually makes sense. If one thinks of the instruction, expel them from where they've expelled you, and then you put that not in Mecca, but you look at that as Jerusalem, and you look at what was going on at the time that the Quran was reportedly being announced, and you've got the Byzantine-Sasanian War. You've got this attempt in 614 by a party of Jews to re-establish worship at the Jewish temple. And they are expelled from Jerusalem, first of all by the Christian inhabitants, and then by the Sasanians. And then you find that the Jews are then expelled from the whole of the Byzantine Empire at the end of the Byzantine-Sasanian War. And yet, what we find, as Mel was saying, all the early references to Muhammad have him leading military operations in Palestine in the 630s, in 634 with Thomas the Presbyter, and 637 the Gospel fragment or the Doctrina Jacobi, and you build up this very clear, I find very clear, very vivid picture of the Quran author inspiring people to fight to recapture Jerusalem at precisely the time that we know that Muhammad was fighting to recapture Jerusalem, and shortly before the Arabs do, in fact, recapture Jerusalem in 637, 638. So for me, the proof is very much in the pudding. The Quran makes sense if you put it into Jerusalem in a way that it simply doesn't make sense if you have to create story after story after implausible story in order to try and explain what the verses mean. You actually put it within a historical framework, and it makes perfect sense, I find. Or if not perfect sense, it makes an awful lot more sense than the traditional narrative.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
In terms of what
in 1 minute, what are you working on?
Okay, in terms of what I'm working on, I've been working for 3 years on a thematic companion to reading the Quran, where I look at the Quran in 100 different themes, and for each one show which are the relevant verses of the Quran, then how they relate to what the Bible tells us, and then summarize what I think is the state of academic knowledge. But that's going to be quite a long project that may not complete in 2022. In the meantime, I'm going to put the Jerusalem thesis into an article, and I'm going to have it published in some sort of sensible way, because I think we have learned so much over the last few years. Mel, Jay, Odin, and the rest of us, we've all learned so much. We have to start writing it down into some sort of academic form. So I'm going to try and lead my own way on this, and write up the Jerusalem thesis as an academic article.
Wonderful idea. I definitely agree with you, and I hope everyone will be willing to write an academic paper or an academic book, hopefully. It'd be cool if all of you actually wrote a book and each one of you contributed to a chapter, because I think it'll be fascinating. So we are wrapping up part 3, and Thomas, don't worry, my brother, I'll be back to you in a second here. So we are wrapping up part 3 of our podcast, Let Us Reason. But we are still, of course, doing the live stream. This is the next part will be the conclusion of this 2-hour-long live stream with fascinating panelists who are behind the many, basically, standard in Islamic narrative proves that it has holes in it. And again, I mean, I want to use Paul's way of addressing this. We're not trying to destroy anybody. We're trying to actually just shed some lights on findings that appear to be contradictory to some of the points that the narrative actually is presenting. And the goal is to help all of us sift through it and find really what sticks and what doesn't. And with that in mind, I'm going to conclude now our part 3 of the podcast, Let Us Reason. Stay tuned for the next part, which will be in few seconds here if you are with us live in studio. This is Fadi, over and out. Thank you. Okay, guys, this is part 4 of our, podcast, Let Us Reason. But this is a continuation of this 2-hour-long live stream concerning what we called the historical critique of Islam, introducing the SIN Sifters. These are the panelists here. Those are the ones that have been pouring out their heart into researching and finding various topics, various evidence that the standard Islamic narrative, if we were to follow it the way it is, doesn't really at least line up sometimes with some of the findings. Now, there are ways to try to explain that, obviously, and that's what each one of these panelists is doing, taking an angle at this standard Islamic narrative to try to make sense of certain parts of it and, of course, shed some light on other parts as well. Well, we left off last time with Paul, and he mentioned to us about his passion concerning the Jerusalem theory and his interest in writing also, hopefully soon, an academic article to be published concerning that. But with that in mind, I want to now jump to Thomas. Thomas, why don't you tell us about what you will be working on in 2022? And then after you do that as well, go ahead and tell us in your own mind, basically, if you were to compare your own findings to what we call the textual criticism of the New Testament, or at least the Bible in general, what sticks out to you?
Okay. So as for next year, I already mentioned I'm currently working on a book, and I hope to finish it next year. This will also be a big picture book, if you will. It will be a pretty long, I fear, but I want to cover basically for a lay audience what the Inara group has published over the last 20 years, more or less. Obviously, it won't go into that much detail because they published 10 books, each with 1,000 pages. But I want to put it in terms so that a lay audience can understand it, but it will also include all the references so you can dig deeper if you want to on any particular topic. So this big picture is what really interests me as well. And so last time we talked about, or the others talked about, what they think is like the most damning piece of evidence they're working on, their finding on this Islamic narrative. And what I think, it's not any individual piece, it's the fact that it all fits together. It's like this big puzzle, and we are making a picture out of it, and it actually works. And that's this Jerusalem hypothesis. It's the Aramaic language in the Quran. It's the Aramaic traditions that we know of in early Christianity. So, for example, we know of these Aramaic Christians like Paul of Samosata, who was a bishop of Antioch. And when you look at his beliefs, it's almost the same as what you find in the Quran. And the same going forward, you have Afad, the Persian sage, again, very similar in his beliefs. We find tons of evidence from Aramaic literature. For example, this Alexander romance that we find in the Quran, which really sticks out a lot, and that doesn't even make a lot of sense to put it in there. But when you know that this is an Aramaic Christian text written sort of as Byzantine propaganda, actually, but then taken by the Arabs and the Byzantine propaganda part taken out, then you kind of understand where we're coming from. Or the book of the Cave of Treasures, again, very influential on the Quran. So I think it's really this bigger picture that's so fascinating, that all those individual people who are doing research in very different directions, but when they come back with the results, it all fits. I think that's really the best part. Now, as for your question regarding similarities or differences with biblical historical criticism, well, I would say, the biblical historical criticism is really where this all comes from. Right? That's when the methodology was developed, and I think unfortunately, it hasn't been applied to Islam as much as to the Bible, because I think we probably would have been a lot further in general, like with this topic, if this had been done earlier. It started out really early, so it started out in the 19th century, early 20th century, but then it really hit the brick wall, and now we're just picking up again from where we left off, like in the 1920s, roughly. So I think it's great that this is happening now, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing more and more results.
Thank you. Definitely, I'm enjoying this, and I hope you take me up on my offer to do a couple of live streams with me where you can unpack many of your findings, of course, because I want people to benefit from that. And of course, for me to add my flavor in terms of my background as well, as it speaks into what you're doing in terms of your research. So thank you so much. I appreciate you, Thomas. Mel, you and I have done a number of shows, but tell us, either, you can take one of two angles or maybe combine them together. The most damaging findings from your perspective concerning sin, or at least when you compare your findings to, for instance, the biblical narrative, what sticks out to you?
Yeah, I'll show a slide here on the screen if I may. I don't know if it can come up on my side.
Yep, it's come up.
Just wait for the team to... Okay, I'll just wait for it. Yeah. Okay, so this slide here is where were the stations of Abraham. So in Islam, it declares that Abraham had a station way down in the Hijaz. But if we look at the biblical narrative, and we can dispute where Ur was, but if you look at Haran, Shechem, Beersheba, Jerusalem, Hebron, these are the places that we know were connected with Abraham. There's no biblical support for the idea that Abraham was ever down in the Hijaz. I think that's a big hole in the narrative there. And there is literally no evidence to support the Islamic narrative on that one. They just literally transposed everything down south. If we look at this image here, we know that in the Quran, it seems to be talking with a Jewish and Christian audience, and this is where we find the Jewish and Christian audience. It's basically in the Fertile Crescent, and we see Nestorianism up here. We have Edessa, and we have obviously Jerusalem and so on. This is really I think, where we would expect the Quran to have come from and where we would expect Islam to have come from. The other thing is, if we think about the conflict at that time in the 7th century, think about the Byzantines and the Persians. They were in conflict there. That was the dividing line between the two sides. And you have the Ghassanids in the west and the Lakhmids in the east, who are both two Arab groups, and they were the buffer zone between the two empires. And really, if you want to ask the question, how did Islam begin? You first of all have to go back to what was the location of the conflict. Well, it was way up here in the north. There was nothing happening way down south in the Hijaz. And this is this is the center of the drama. So I think that's tells its own story. If we look at this, and apologies for the big blue blob, it didn't come out so well here on this. But if you look at this map here, you can see the presence of Aramaic speakers in the 7th century, and then Hebrews there, and Arabic is down here. But if we take into account the fact that the Quran has a lot of not just Aramaic words, but stories that come from the Aramaic tradition, also from the Hebrew tradition, it fits for the Quran to have come from here. I think this image here really tells its own tale. Way down here, the people wouldn't be interacting with all of the various stories that abounded in the Syriac community. So it's an anomaly that should be really obvious to anyone who looks into it. If I take another example, the Nabatean alphabet is a halfway house between Aramaic and Arabic. And of course, the Nabatean alphabet is what the Arabic script came from. So it started out as a cursive form of Nabatean, developed into the Arabic alphabet from the 4th century, which is why Nabatean's letter forms are intermediate between the more northerly Semitic scripts such as Hebrew and those of Arabic. And due to this, it was possible to transliterate from Aramaic to Arabic easily. So when we hear talk about how the Quran was originally in Aramaic, or texts were in Aramaic first and it became the Quran, it makes sense when we take into account the fact that the Arabic script came out of the Nabatean alphabet.
Right.
And on this slide here, we can see the similarity between the scripts. And it's interesting, even the terminology that we find in the Quran, all the religious terminology, it's either Aramaic or Hebrew. Again, that tells its own tale. It supports the idea that this was in a milieu which was familiar with Christianity and Judaism. You don't find that way down the Hijaz. If we take another example here, we find that the Nabatean script was refined in Hira, which you'll find here. And you'll also notice that all of the Jewish academies are around Hira. And now the Quran makes sense. It's in dialogue with the Christians, it's in dialogue with the Jews. It makes perfect sense up here. It makes no sense down in the Hijaz. And also what's interesting is you have the Manichaeans are in this area, who obviously have a lot of Gnostic influences and so on. So you can see here that Mani started here back in the 3rd century, and Manichaeism spread alongside Islam over the centuries. So that's interesting. And we can see elements of Manichaeism in the Quran as well. So obviously I'm just giving you a bird's eye view, but as you look at the maps, it becomes pretty obvious where Islam began. Here's another map, and it gives you an idea of the Jewish academies. So if we were looking for places where the people who wrote the Quran were interacting, guess number 1 would be here, where the Jewish academies are, and guess number 2 would be over here. You won't find that level of knowledge of Judaism anywhere else but these 2 places in particular. So that's where I'd be expecting the writers behind the Quran to have been interacting with people.
Right. Excellent point.
If I take one more example, if we think about the fact that, is it a coincidence that the Shafi and Hanafi schools developed in the same place and time as the Jewish academies? Now, this is a bit of a muddle of a map there, which I borrowed from the internet, but you can see that in black there, Pumbedita and Surah these are some examples of the Jewish academies, and Hanafi and the Shafi schools started there as well. And what's interesting is they paralleled the Jewish approach. So, for example, the Jews had the Torah and the Mishnah, Muslims had their Quran and the Sunnah, and the same sort of same sort of methodology you find in both. So this paints a northern narrative and not the standard Islamic narrative. And what's also interesting, if we look at this map here, You can see in dark blue is where Greek was spoken at the time, and here's the Hellenized area. And we mentioned earlier that the Alawites viewed the Greek philosophers as prophets. And what's interesting, in the Quran, you find Galen's erroneous embryology. You find Thales' idea that everything is made out of water. These are both Greeks. And you also have references made to reincarnation, which is directly from Greek philosophy. I'm not probably going to go into all of that now, because I'm sure it's a bit too much, but I just show that there as evidence. And
Mel, I want you, brother, just to, if you want to wrap it up, if you want to focus on one last thing, maybe, just because I want to give time to our remaining guests here, because we have about 10 minutes left.
Yep. So the last point I would say is, again, up north, we have the origin of Al-Fitr. It came from Haran, and I've shown this on a video before, that there's very strong archaeological evidence to support that. So again, it proves that Islam came from the north. So if you look at the maps, look at the archaeology, I think there's a very strong case for Islam having begun in this milieu up in the north. So that's it from me.
Thanks, Mel. Jay?
No, I want to say something at the very end. Go ahead and get all these guys out, and then I want to say and wrap this all up and bring it together.
And by the way, so we have about less than 10 minutes left. So I apologize, Murad, Odin, and Paul, if you can just give us a quick answer to this question about maybe if you compare, your research about the standard Islamic narrative with the New Testament, for instance, or the Bible. Is there something specific that sticks out to you? And then Jay will wrap it up. After we close, please stay with us. We can interact with some of the questions that we've been receiving. So, Murad, if you can start, please.
Okay, just one simple thing. If the Kaaba and Mecca was really the house of Abraham, why didn't ever any Jew or Christian try and invade Mecca, Saudi Arabia? This is one. Now, when it comes with the Bible, every time you see new archaeological finds from Israel confirming the Bible. So actually, I don't believe in the Bible as salvation. I'm not a Christian, but I do believe that it is history. And everything written in it happened in history, and it is carved in stone. And that's it for me.
All right. Thank you. Odin?
Yes, to do it very, very quick. I think we have now evidence to show that the Quran is not an Islamic text. I know this is heresy. People must be saying, what is he uttering here? But when we look at the Quran, we don't see, when we look at the literal text of the Quran, we don't see Islam as much as proto-Islam, as something that came before Islam. And what we understand then is that the Quran is not the source of Islam, but a sort of byproduct. It is a product of Islam. Islam made the Quran out of previous scriptures. And particularly, one can look at the mentions of the word Quran in the Quranic text. And this is something I'm about to unwrap here, but there is a video in preparation with a recording that is scheduled with Jay, and we will get all the details of this. But what we see in the Quranic text is that the Quran that is designated is not the Islamic Quran, but it is another book, which is not the Islamic Quran. It is an Arabic lectionary, so a religious book, which is not the Quran, which is taken from the mother scripture, the mother kitab. And what is the mother kitab?
Yeah.
I think it is the Torah. I think those are Jewish scriptures. And we have so evidence in the Quran itself that the Quran, the Quranic text, Quran, is not the Islamic Quran, but another book. And I don't know how the standard Islamic narrative can cope with this.
Yep. Wonderful, wonderful. That's a good way to say it. And also this will be exciting for people to stay tuned for that. Paul, You get the last word before Jay, which you know, Jay always gets the last word.
Hi. It seems to me absolutely obvious, and it should have been obvious from day one, that the Quran is not intended to be read or recited as a standalone document. It is absolutely saturated by biblical references. Some of them are obvious, such as the stories and the names of the prophets, and others are far more subtle and are only really now becoming popularly known, where Gabriel Said Reynolds has done fantastic work in tracking biblical turns of phrase in the Quran, and little phrases, little combinations of words that show that it's intended to be read in conjunction with the Torah and the New Testament and the Psalms and other works. So where this all goes is that in order to understand the Quran, you've really got to read it within the context of the Old Testament and the New Testament, and the Islamic world very belatedly needs to wake up and start doing this. And they need to start, Muslims need to start reading and learning about the Old Testament and the New Testament and the other parabiblical writings, the apocryphal Gospels and the Talmud and so on. And they need to start putting the Quran inside that framework. And that's where it's going. And that's where we need to put the Quran where it belongs within this Judeo-Christian tradition, and stop with this nonsensical idea that it's a standalone document revealed in the desert, miles from anywhere, and only explicable by fantastical stories about winged horses and so on.
Yep. Thank you so much, Paul. Fascinating. Jay, you get 3 minutes, my brother, before I wrap it up myself.
Yeah, and I think if you've been listening to what all these fellows have been saying, you notice they're all saying, I'm getting a lot of text coming in, people saying, they're all saying the same thing. Well, lo and behold, if you start to sift all the standard Islamic narrative, what comes out at the end, what is the germ, the gem, the beautiful historical narrative that we are looking for? We're looking for the historical narrative. And when you look at the historical narrative, it goes back to what was actually there in the 7th century. Have you noticed when you pull away all the layers of the Quran, when you pull all the layers of Muhammad's character, when you pull all the layers of Mecca, the book, the man, and the place, when you pull all the layers and come to what you get at the very end, you see a 7th century environment of lots of different sectarian groups, Jewish and Christians, who are in that northern area, not down in the south. They're all up in the north, as Mel has been trying to really emphasize. But take a look and see what was happening there. There was a real internecine confrontation going on because they were waiting for Jesus to return. As Odin has always said, they didn't see Jesus return. Therefore, you're having different groups who are trying to get to ascendancy. When you start to see that ascendancy, who are the ones who are the ascendant? They are the ones, the Arians, who do not believe in Jesus as God. They are the ones that Abdul Malik introduces, confronting the divinity of Jesus, confronting the Trinity, confronting his sonship. And what do? They are the ones that now have to create not only a man, a book, and a place, they've got to then create that identity, which they don't have, but the Jews and the Christians do. And that's why they start to introduce this man, Muhammad. He becomes a man. But what's fascinating, look at the book. The book really shows that there's a problem here, because when you start taking the text and the script out of it, look and see what Lulling found. Look and see what Luxembourg found. If you take out the harakat, if you take out the ijams, the harakat are the vowels, you take out the ijams, which are the dots. Take out the dots and the vowels, and you go back to the germinal text, you go back to the skeletal text of the Quran itself, you suddenly realize that this comes from another book. This is another book. Are these hymns? Are these lectionaries? Are these homilies that Odin's been talking about? What our good friend Thomas has been talking about? What Luxembourg and Lulling discovered way back in the 1970s. Lulling's got destroyed, thrown out of the university system because of what he discovered 50 years ago, and had to go into obscurity. And that text, when you go and see the text that the Quran comes from, take a look and see what it's all about. It's all about Jesus Christ. Really, the original Quran was all about Jesus. And that's what gets me excited, because what I have been struggling for 40 years, one thing that I've always been asking is we need to get people back to Jesus. We need to bring the Muslims home. Have you not heard me say this so many times?
Right.
You've heard me say this for years because you've been working with me for years. We need to bring Muslims home. And when we bring them home, let's take them away from the Quran that has bastardized these lectionaries. Remember what Odin said. Remember Odin on Surah 23 and Surah 70, when we unpack that. When you look and see this beautiful prayer in Surah 23, that's about the believers, what their duties are, and what's going to happen to the believers, what their rewards are. That beautiful prayer is bastardized in verse 6 and 7 by saying what chastity. Chastity allows polygamy and also allows that which your right hand possesses. That's a bastardization of a beautiful prayer that was to Jesus Christ and to believers. That is what the Quran has done. That is what Islam has done. That is what the Prophet Muhammad has done. He has bastardized my Lord. He has bastardized my book, and he has bastardized everything I know to be holy and true. And that's why I want to bring Muslims home. I want to bring them back to Jesus. I want to bring them back to the original Quran, which was all about this man and that place and that book.
Thank you. And thank you, our great panelists here. I appreciate you taking the time to do this. And as I stated, I would love to reach out to each one of you to do 1, 2, maybe even more than that live streams to focus on your area of expertise, some of the material you've shared with us here today. I apologize that the time did not allow for you to unpack everything, but this is just a teaser for people to at least get acquainted with your work. And again, thank you, Dr. J, for helping me coordinate all of this, and also Brother Mel, who played a factor in that as well. Again, thank you to our viewers here in our live studios, and thank you to our listeners on our podcast, Let Us Reason. This is the conclusion of part 4 of our podcast, and also the official conclusion of our live stream. But after we wrap it up right now, I would like for you to stay with us for a few more minutes, if possible, to see if you have any questions and for our panelists to respond to that, provided the questions are related to the topic. We're not going to address questions about the Trinity, right? We didn't talk about the Trinity. We're not going to address questions about the deity of Christ and Christology. We did not talk about that. So those are for different, audience, for different topics, for different guests that we bring here to talk about those specific issues. So with that in mind, I want to thank everyone. Thank you for those who also gave through Super Chat. I saw Islam Critique. Brother, we miss you. Thank you so much for all that you do. And thank you, everyone, for joining us here. This is Al-Fadi. God bless you all. Okay. Now I want to see if anyone has any specific questions from both channels, by the way, from my channel, Sira International, which, by the way, we encourage you to go and subscribe to it if you haven't done so, or PfanderFilms, and also we encourage you to subscribe to that channel. And you've heard our panelists here. Some of them already have channels like Sneakers Corner, and others are working towards establishing their own. We encourage you, of course, to interact with them and subscribe to those particular channels when they become available. But I want to see if there are any specific questions related to the topic. While we're doing so, go ahead, Jay. Is there anything else you want to add?
We need to also, for all of you guys and all your channels, what we're going to do is when this will be put up, this is going live already. It's going to be up there. We're going to introduce in the description box.
Absolutely.
Each one of your channels, so you all have that.
Yeah, please email me that link and we'll make sure it's incorporated in there.
Murad, yours is the newest one, so make sure that we get that link of yours, Murad.
Yeah.
And of course, Paul and Odin and Mel already have their channels. We'll make sure that also gets put into the description box of both of our channels. And we're still waiting for you, Thomas, to get your channel up and running.
Mm-hmm.
It's coming.
Now, there's one person that has here, they've mentioned, when are you 6 going to write a book together? Okay, well, that's the caveat has been put out there. Maybe what we might do is an anthology. Each one of us will probably do a chapter on that which is our expertise and that which we want to get. Maybe even suggesting that we should get probably in the next year, we should start a book, anthology of the 6 of us, putting out our ideas for the next year, and that just gets added to every year, so that we come out on a yearly basis with the newest edition. There'll be others coming on board, at least on our channel. One of the SIN Sifters we want to introduce would be De Jong, our Lloyd De Jong. You've already had him on Mel on your channel. We want to bring him from South Africa. He lives in Poland. He's been doing an amazing job on the Sharia, and also he's been doing some interesting material on the Sirah. So he's going to be coming on board in January on PfanderFilms. Mel, you'll be probably bringing him back on board on your channel as well. Am I correct?
Yep, definitely.
Do you want to say something real quickly about Lloyd, because he will be becoming part of our group?
Yeah, sure. Well, he's been studying Islam for the last 11 years, and his knowledge is encyclopedic. I've never met someone who has done so much research. Every time I meet someone new, I think they've reached the top of their research, but this guy just knows so much. And he focuses on a different area to what I would typically focus. He looks at the development all the way through from the 7th century all the way through to modern times, and he really understands the way Islam works. You know, if you ask the average person on the street, what do Muslims believe, they would say it's all based upon the Quran, but he would say that it's all based on the Sharia, because the Sharia is the bit that it's really complicated to understand. There's lots of rules and so on, and there's a public face and a private face of Sharia, if you can call it a private face. He really understands that really well. He's gone through that with a fine-tooth comb, you know, and his understanding of the Sirah is amazing as well. I don't want to spoil the surprise, but what he has got to say about the Sirah is just incredible. I think everyone will be blown away about that.
Yeah, we're going to find that there's a lot more than just one Sirah or two Sirahs. It's not just Ibn Hisham's or Al-Waqidis. But hold on, because we do want to keep that as a caveat. We want him to introduce that. But certainly, he's going to be another really asset, because he comes from a whole different standpoint, a whole different area, and also from a different country. So we're just kind of adding to our international group, aren't we? Exciting stuff.
Yeah. Thank you. So I see a question that is baffling to me, and the question here is, do you think that your findings will in any way help or support the push for a one-world religion? Well, I can answer that myself, and I'll tell you, we're not pushing for one-world religion. We are not going after religions of the world. We're just focusing on one religion called Islam. From my perspective, we are pushing for one Lord. If that's what you're referring to, yes, we are promoting one. I'm promoting one Lord. Okay, I can speak for myself. Dr. J is also promoting one Lord. I don't want to put words in the mouth of my panelists here, because I don't want anyone to attack them or make any false claims against them. But am I pushing for one Lord? Yes, my Lord Jesus Christ. Absolutely. I can tell you that much. So hopefully that will answer the question, simply because Jesus was pushing for one Lord also, and he says, go and make disciples of all nations. Anything else you want to add?
Well,
to
I mean,
Jay?
one of the things that we have been consistent on for the last, in our case, 40 years, I don't know how many years you've been involved in this, I've always said over and over again, I want to bring people home. I've always wanted to bring people home, because that's where they belong. We need to get home again. We need to bring our Muslim brothers and sisters home. And I want to ask the questions that have been asked of us that really stumped me, and when I saw what happened back in 1995. And that is, one of the most difficult questions for Muslims today is the historical critique. Because this is nothing to do with emotion. This is nothing to do with my experience. This is nothing to do with my livelihood or my background or what my family's taught me. It's actually a neutral question. It's the best question for any religion. It's not just Islam that needs to be asked this. We need to ask this of the Upanishads. We need to ask this of the Bhagavad Gita. We need to ask this of the Vedas, the Granth Sahib out of the Sikhs, the Book of Mormon, you name it. Every religious book, which are a pantheon of them, all make historical claims. The Bible makes enormous amount of historical claims, and so far only the Bible has been asked this question. Can you prove that there was a man named Abraham or someone named Moses? Is there a Jesus who lived in the first century who died on the cross? These are the questions that have been asked of us for 200 years. We have answered those questions. Now we need to ask the same questions of Islam. And so for me, the reason I want to ask that is so we can bring them home to the real book, the real man in the real place that has answered those questions already. Well, that means come on home. Come on home.
Amen. Amen. Well, just I want to comment on something that a person by the name of Billy Mandalay on my channel saying, once these guys start publishing their papers and books, there's going to be a big earthquake in the Islamic world. Billy, we're publishing things already digitally, which is even better than books and articles, because they can burn those. They'll always be there. And we're not taking anything down. Wink, wink. They're always going to stay there. Yeah. All right, folks, any last minute, word for all of you? Please feel free if you want to add something maybe that we could not address during the live stream itself. But we're still live, but at least you can share something else if you like. Anyone?
This is the first time I've not heard them lost for words.
Hey, man, bring them to my channel. Looks like I can... Odin,
looks
go
like
ahead.
Odin is saying good night. The rest of you, you're in Europe.
Just something to add and complement what you just said. This is not about the quest for the one religion. It is a quest for truth.
Exactly.
And every non-believer can befriend this idea. Search for the truth. You don't know what we will find, but it is a quest for the truth. And the truth will set you free.
Amen. Thank you so much. Wonderful.
What a good way to end.
Amen. Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate you all. I'll be in touch. So be on the look for my email, especially in the spam box. You probably will find it there too. But all that to say is I would love to have each one of you. And then I would love to have this panel discussion more often, especially when Jay is with me here, because I think really it's powerful, it's meaningful, and it brings faces to the names that they keep hearing all the time, and even the research that Jay and even myself unpack. I mean, it seemed like we're going through a tradition now. You guys work with him, and then I like to bring him also on my channel to unpack the same thing, simply because we want to broaden the knowledge about this as far as possible. And that's all we're trying to do. It's not about us taking credit for anything. It's about us, like you said, Odin, spreading the truth out there for people to decide. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jay. This is Fadi, over and out. And I know this is Jay's phrase, but it's been taken already, and he can file a suit against me if he likes. Blessings to all of you.